The Five Nights at Freddy's franchise currently has 12 games and 24 books. All of that equates to around 374 hours worth of content. And still, nobody has a concrete clue on the story of the game. That is pretty much the same as reading all of the Game of Thrones books 3 times over and still not knowing who Jon Snow's mother and father is. This really begs the question of how Scott Cawthon and the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise got to this point. When Scott Cawthon made Five Nights at Freddy's, he really had no idea that it would become as popular as it is today. It was meant to be the last game he ever made, because previously he had found no success in the gaming industry. But little did Scott know, he baked Five Nights at Freddy's with a special ingredient.
Yeah, boy.
And no, the main appeal of Five Nights at Freddy's wasn't that it was a point-and-click horror game, although the jump scares were genuinely terrifying and the gameplay was good. Rather, it was actually the hidden Easter eggs that were sprinkled into the game. Sometimes, a player had a rare chance to see a haunted yellow bear randomly appear into their office. In certain places, there would be a ghost trying to reach out by saying, "It's me." The papers could be replaced with news, talking about the arrest of someone and the death of 5 kids inside the restaurant. And this obviously made players very curious about the lore of the game. Why are the animatronics stuffing people in suits? Who is saying "it's me"? Who killed the 5 kids? Scott was now forced to continue game development, because why would he miss this chance to make a mark in video game history? And also there was a whole community who was eagerly waiting for the next developments in his story. But there was a slight problem. Scott had made the lore for shits and giggles. He didn't really expect much to come out of this game, and he didn't expect to continue the story anytime soon. So the real story began forming after the first Five Nights at Freddy's. This is a very important detail. Scott was tasked with making a fully fledged story with a beginning and an end from a random story he made up on a whim. The second Five Nights at Freddy's was released later that same year, and it was packed with more Easter eggs than the first game. There were secret minigames that you could get after dying, secret cutscenes, secret characters that could appear, and a mysterious purple man. By the way, purple is a very common color in this franchise that is used to represent a shadow. So, Purple Man is technically Shadow Man. Out of all the lore given to us, the main thing we're going to focus on here is the minigames. The first one puts us into an 8-bit version of the pizzeria where we play as Withered Freddy. After entering a few rooms, we can catch a glimpse of the puppet, seemingly telling us to follow it. As we do, in the background we can hear letters being said that spell out After a couple of minutes pass, the game abruptly ends. Although there is a small chance that upon entering a room you could be met with the Shadow Man. When he attacks our character, the screen abruptly turns to static, with a sentence in the bottom left corner saying, "You can't." The next minigame is Foxy Go Go Go. In this minigame we play as Foxy, going out of his cove to surprise and entertain kids. On our third turn, waiting outside our cove is the Shadow Man, and upon entering the next room, we can see that he has killed the 5 kids waiting for us. The third game has us playing as Freddy, and we are tasked with keeping the children happy by giving them cake. As we do this, we can notice a child outside of the establishment crying, seemingly locked out. The game begins slowing down as a purple car approaches the child outside, and out comes the Shadow Man. He kills the child outside and leaves. Our last minigame has us playing as the puppet, giving gifts to 4 dead children. After we've done that, we need to now give them masks, which represent the main cast from the first game. Once we complete the minigame, we are jump scared by Golden Freddy, not before revealing a hidden 5th child behind his jump scare. This minigame also has secret letters which spell out Fans were absolutely stoked. I mean, this had answered many mysteries from the first game. We found out about the 5 missing children, the murderer, and who the crying child on the poster was. We also now have an official protagonist and antagonist for the series. The puppet was the boy killed outside of the establishment, with his sole goal to save and help the others. But we still have a lot of unanswered questions, like why was FNAF attacked at the end of the first game? What is the bite of 87? Who is Golden Freddy? This transitions us into the next installment, Five Nights at Freddy's 3. Yet again, we are a security guard, but now we are at a haunted frights attraction, set 30 years after the closing of the last Freddy's restaurant. After our first night, the phone guy gives us some very horrifying news.
Hey man, okay, I have some awesome news for you. First of all, we found some vintage audio training cassettes. Dude, these are like prehistoric. I think they were like training tapes for like other employees or something like that. So I thought we could like have them playing like over the speakers as people walk through the attraction. Dude, that makes us feel legit, man. But I have an even better surprise for you. You're not gonna believe this. We found one. A real one. Gotta go, man.
While it is good news for the company, I mean, they boost the ratings and profits, it isn't for us. Because this vintage animatronic will end up being the one we have to face off in the following nights. In this game, through minigames and Easter eggs, it is revealed to us that the Shadow Man is eventually cornered by the spirits of the children he had murdered. He climbs into an old Springlock Bonnie costume in order to protect himself. But the moisture of the establishment ends up making the Springlocks go off, which stab into his flesh and bones, forcing him to bleed out in excruciating pain. Apparently, we had been facing off the Shadow Man in this game the entire time. Well, what remains of him. On the other side of the story, we follow the puppet, who brings together the 5 dead kids in order to give them the happiest day and set their souls free. After you finish your nights, you decide to burn down the attraction and blame it on faulty wiring. And that should have been it, really. There wasn't any need to make more installments in the story as it had pretty much been concluded. But for some godforsaken reason, we find out that the Shadow Man survived the fire. This is where we run into our first major problem of this franchise, leaving more questions than answers. Apart from the before-mentioned mysteries, we now must wonder, why are there phantoms? What happened to the Shadow Man after the fire? What closed the Freddy's establishment? And how on earth did the Shadow Man survive in a costume for 30 years? Scott said that Five Nights at Freddy's 4 would be the final game. This time we aren't actually a security guard. We're inside a house, fending off against nightmare versions of the main cast. As we progress through the game, we find out that we play as a crying child who is deathly terrified of the Freddy's franchise. His brother constantly scares him with a foxy mask. Kids tell him scary stories about the animatronics. He is locked up in a room with a dead child inside of a costume. Wait, what? And on the fateful day of his birthday, his brother, alongside his friends, decide that the birthday boy should give Freddy a big kiss. So they shove him inside his mouth. And the kid tragically dies. The game ends as somebody promises the child that they will put him back together. While in my opinion the games should have ended with the third one, this is actually not that bad. we get a bit of backstory behind the motives of the Shadow Man. Through clues, we can determine that the crying child is actually the son of the Shadow Man, and the Shadow Man is devastated by the tragedy on his birthday and wants to figure out a way to put his son back together. This is what caused him to begin murdering children. He wished to experiment with the physics of ghosts and souls in order to revive his comatose child. Quite the story, if I do say so myself, but yet again we stumble upon another problem. Loose threads. There are still so many more unanswered questions that were not expanded upon in this game. And if murdering kids to resurrect his child was the true motive of the Shadow Man, why is there already a dead child stuffed into a suit? There were too many questions. So, to settle everything, the main leading theorist for this franchise, MatPat, decided to host a live stream where he would bring together other theorists in order to conclude the loose threads. The chat could also decide to chip in and try to solve the mystery together. One of those viewers would be Scott Cawthon himself. And the following clues he decides to give the community are 4 games, 1 story. What is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. And lastly, in the Five Nights at Freddy's 4 minigame, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak? Without knowing it, the community just watched Scott Cawthon confirm that all 4 games were nightmares in the crying child's mind. Wait, what? The only animatronic shadows we ever see in this franchise is of Freddy and Bonnie. Exactly the same shadow characters we see in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Toy Chica for some reason loses her beak when she decides to attack us in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. The toy animatronics are literally based off of toys.
Is it possible that FNAF 2 didn't actually happen?
This child tells us about the rumors of animatronics stuffing people into suits. And here is Phone Guy telling us in Five Nights at Freddy's 1 that they indeed do stuff people in suits. In all of the games, the only animatronic that jump scares us instead of mauling us to death is Foxy.
Just like how your brother scares you with a Foxy mask.
Golden Freddy speaks to you, just like your Golden Freddy plush does. Mind-blowing. 4 games, 1 story. The story of the crying child. The community was shocked, but not in a good way. They expected much more from this lore-filled franchise, and all of it ending up being the dream of a comatose child was kind of boring. And this leads to our next problem: rewriting the story too much. Seeing the negative feedback he had received for the story he had built, he decided to make a new one. He attempts to make another story from a fully fledged story that was based on random junk. Other than this being a problem, it is actually a catalyst that exacerbates the other problems because it makes the lore more confusing. But Scott said fuck it, we'll make it work, and decided to release FNAF World. This game was meant to shape the events of FNAF 4 and turn it into a whole new direction. After beating the full game, we get this cutscene.
I'm impressed. What are you doing here? Can't you see that I'm busy? You deactivated my games. I didn't know what else to do. I don't want to disappoint people. But my mind isn't right. I've made something terrible. Her name is Baby. It's too late to deactivate her. I'm sorry.
The show will begin momentarily. Everyone, please stay in your seats.
Wow, what a fucking amazing ending. People were now actually interested in what Scott was cooking. And then Scott decided to retcon the ending. Apparently, Scott had decided to rewrite the story again. We know this because in the following game, we learn that Baby is a product of Afton Electronics, and the Shadow Man is named William Afton. If this guy made Baby, then it means that he is the Shadow Man. But it doesn't make sense. If he kills himself here, then how does he go on to become Springtrap and live 30 years? Not to mention, Baby is meant to be possessed by his daughter Elizabeth, who is trying to find her father. Yeah, the lore just becomes more confusing after this game, and here we are with our fourth problem: retcon. It leaves us with the dreaded question of what else is retcon? Yet again, this exacerbates our previous problems and muddies the water thicker. And now is a good time to mention that the most important thing in a story is a character's motive. If you fumble this, you fumble everything, because someone has to have a good reason for what they're doing. It's what makes a story interesting.
How about the fact that he shot a kid?
When Five Nights at Freddy's Pizzeria Simulator was released, we got that amazing Henry monologue, which tried revealing to us the Shadow Man's motives. Apparently, the Freddy that bit his child was Henry's animatronic, and in a drunken fit of rage, he took revenge on Henry by murdering his daughter Charlotte. Though something unexpected happened. The next time the Shadow Man came around to the pizzeria, he saw that the puppet was possessed. He was stunned, and it sparked hope in him, as this revelation could possibly lead to the resurrection of his dead son. So he went on to murder 5 missing kids and subsequently more of them in order to experiment on the physics of remnant and matter. That is genuinely a really good motive that makes a really good story. And what's sad is that it's confirmed to not be the case. The order of the deaths in the franchise is revealed to us to be first the 5 missing kids, then the puppet, and then the crying child. And pretty much with the hints, lore, and story that is presented to us with the new games, literally the most likely story is that the Shadow Man and his partner Henry Emily decided to kill kids for the shits and giggles. But Afton saw one of the kids possess an animatronic and told Henry about it, but Henry was like, this pissed off Afton, so he decided to kill Henry's daughter and then was like, dude, look, I just killed your daughter and she possessed the puppet thingy. Do you believe me now? And in the meantime, one of the killer animatronics crushes the frontal lobe of Afton's child. Yeah. The next time you decide to watch a theory on the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, I want you to notice how none of them can come to a conclusion simply because of one or more of these things. It's a genuinely funny pattern that you will notice. And this just goes to show that Five Nights at Freddy's lore really, really sucks.